Okay. Let me see here. Can you hear me? I'm pretty sure you can. Yeah, well, I had it muted for a while. I'm gonna have to do some different things this time. Because I actually was working on this track last night, just fooling around with some mix bus stuff. And I came up with a decent chain, so I just was going to go through what I did since I've already done it. But when I went through the through all the chain, it increased the volume a lot, so that messed with the mic volume. And I didn't want the mic going through the mix bus after I did all this, because it's gonna just add all kinds of crazy gain and different EQ that isn't necessarily part of it. So now I just had to reconfigure it. So now I've got it going on. It's going directly out to the monitors instead of through the chain, and I've got it streaming right here. But as I turn these plugins on, I'm going to have to change the volume on the track so you can actually hear what I'm saying, or change the volume on the voiceover. And I probably won't be able to do any comments while the music's playing, because the sound's gonna be a little louder, and it's gonna get all kinds of crazy feedback. So it's all weird. So I'm gonna try to get through this without it being all right. So how's it sound right now? It should be okay. I mean, it sounded all right in my headphones, but I can't put them on because there's a delay. All right, so let's see here. Yeah, this delay is kind of crazy on the streaming. That's why I try not to ask too many questions or be too crazy. All right, so that's up. Once I get the go-ahead, I'll start going, because I don't want to do a whole session if the sound is messed up. Let me... I figure... Okay. All right, so I don't know if it's a latency as far as why there's a delay between when I talk and here. I mean, I'm guessing it's going through so many different channels. It's going through my audio interface into this broadcasting program, and I don't know how long it takes for this to send to YouTube. You know, there's probably some latency. Probably shouldn't be that much. You know what? There might even be a latency thing here, but that's all right. I mean, it's not too interactive with these sessions, so it shouldn't be an issue. So, all right. So last night, well, first of all, let me tell you this plugin that, you know, I listened to a podcast. It's a mastering podcast, actually, because there's not too many audio or mixing podcasts out there. So when I find one, I listen to it. And one thing that Ian Shepherd is the mixing or the mastering engineer that hosts it. One thing I knew a lot of the basic stuff, but one other thing I took from it, which I already knew but I didn't practice it much, was gain matching. Not necessarily gain staging, but gain matching. When you're on your master bus and you start making EQ tweaks and compression tweaks and all this and that, you may think it sounds better because it sounds louder. And I think we've already mentioned that on here. So one way to combat that, yes, of course, you can bypass it, or you can just match the output volume once you make your EQ changes. If you make a big boost, you know, that's going to increase the overall loudness, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was good for the tone of the track. If you match the output value or the output volume of your EQ to match what it was originally before you made the changes, yeah, you can then A/B the plugin and see if if you're actually helping the track, or it was just louder and you were more excited about it. That can be annoying trying to do that for every plugin you do. So they have a plugin that kind of wraps around. So for example, the first thing I've done on this, what I was doing on this master bus, there's this plugin from Air Windows. It's called Air, and it adds top EQ, but in a different way, not in a typical way that they do, and it works really well. So if I wanted to know if this was really helping, I can add this plugin called ABLM. There's a few different ones out there. So you put one before the plugin and one after the plugin. And the one after you set as the receiver. And what this does is it automatically matches the output volume of what it was before you used this plugin that's sandwiched in between it. And it does it in real time. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's good enough. See, it's on auto. So if I make an EQ change and I put 10 decibels of 60 hertz, of course the track's gonna be louder. This will automatically turn the output down, so you can actually hear if it's changing the tone of the track. So we could do a quick test. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it because this Air, it probably doesn't add a ton of gain, but just want you to see what it is. So I'm probably gonna have to mute the mic when I do this because the volume is gonna be a little louder on this one. So let's see. Actually, maybe I'll just keep it low. Let me try that. I just have to check the gate to make sure the speakers aren't triggering the gate. Okay, so that'll work for now at a low volume. So right now, if I hit this button, it's gonna go to what it sounds like before your plug-in that you've got it sandwiched. I've actually got it bypassed right now, so it's not on. But so if I turn it on, you'll hear some of that air, right? Actually, let me turn this gain matching plugin. So this is what it sounds like on and off. It's very subtle, but that's because when I had it at full gain, full mix before, I had added all these other plugins which made it brighter, so I ended up turning this down. But anyway, this plugin, if I was adding the Air, gain, I might be like, oh, this sounds great because it's really bright and it's getting louder, but it might not necessarily be better. So you put this on, this balances before and after the plugin. So now, this is before the Air, and that's after, but it's gain matched. So if this added a decibel or two to the entire track, it's automatically turning it down. Although it's saying there's no gain difference, maybe it's such a slight thing that it's not adding. Actually, I want to hear that. I'm gonna turn the monitors up so I can hear it. Okay, so yeah, it is doing. Let me show you what it's like at full wet. So I'm pretty sure you heard the difference. The whole point of this was just to let you know that it's important to make sure that you're not getting excited about the change you're making because it's getting louder. We tend to like things that are louder for whatever reason, for the most part. So this helps you not do that. So I did a lot of this mix bus stuff using this plugin, and I think it helps. What it really helps, to be honest, is preserving your dynamics. Because we can tend to, when we're on the mix bus stage, just start cranking limiters because it's getting louder and louder and louder. But what you don't realize is that you're actually squashing dynamics. And you might say, oh yeah, I knew that. Everyone knows that. No, even the best engineers, they know it in their mind, not, you know, knowledge-wise, but their mind gets tricked into hearing what they think they're hearing it. And then when they A-B it right here, before the limiter and after, since it's the same volume, you'll hear how squashed it is. So anyway, I use this plugin to set a lot of these mix bus things. So I'm going to go through a couple of them. And it probably sounds different than it did before, even without the mix bus, because without the mix bus work, because I used that gain matching plugin to redo a little bit of the kick. The two main things I changed on the kick processing was I added just these weird spikes that sounded good when I was and you know, that plugin is not perfect. It's really hard to make a plugin match the loudness exactly as it was before a plugin, because it's not only calculating peak information, it's calculating average information. It's really doing it based on average, not on peak. And it has to do that in real time. So it takes like 300 millisecond snapshots of the sound and adjusts based on that. But I think it's still better than nothing at all. So these were the two changes I made. I'll show you what the track was before, the kick was before I used that ABLM, the level matching thing. So we'll do that. And the other difference was this was down at 30 hertz instead of 66. So this is it's a frequency dependent compressor. So it's only compressing 66 hertz and below. Before, I had it only doing 35 because I just wanted to get some of the boom out. But when I used that loudness matching plugin, what I noticed as I moved it up is that there was still a lot of boom that I was letting in that was unnecessary. And but I wasn't being able to tell that, because if I were to move this up to 66 as the track is playing, the volume is going to go down. And I'm going to be like, oh, that doesn't sound as good. But what the plugin does is it matches the output volume, so it actually increases it as I'm doing it. As you can see here, I added 2.5 at the end to match that volume. So here's what it was before. Then after I move it to 66 and add the output gain, we get So you might hear that and think, oh, well, you know, there's not a lot of that boom that I liked in there. Well, surprisingly, if you're listening in headphones or less than par speakers, you're gonna immediately go for the extra bass. But it's really, if you were to translate this, move this into like a system that had a subwoofer or something like that, you'll notice it handles the bass so much better. And overall, once you start compressing the track as a whole and you do all that, these little tweaks are what's going to get you a more energetic mix that isn't dark and boomy, which is one of the things I think happens a lot with people's mixes is they're too dark because they're adding too much bass, because their headphones can handle it and it sounds good in the headphones, but it's really, in actuality, it's too much. And when you start bringing up the mid-range energy and the high end, that's where your headphones will say, you know, they won't start tricking you anymore, because you'll be like, oh, this track is energetic because it's got that mid-range and high in there, and you won't be missing the low end so much. You need to get your energy from the mid-range and the highs as well. So, and then the EQ part. Now, it does change the tone a little bit, but I think it sits better in the track. I think it's important to get it to sit better instead of being more exciting first. So it sits nice right now. You might be wanting a little bit more thump or whatever. But I think if we go through some of these other individual tracks, we can kind of show that, how we can get it to sit right first, and then you can add your energy later with parallel things. I actually used that loudness matching plugin to set the EQ after this parallel. Before, this wasn't here. It was just doing the full signal and whatever, and I think this ended up sounding better as well. So anyway, I did that for that, and I also did the same thing for this bass. This bass, I added a few different things. That one, I think we knew, or was in there before. This is new. And this is new. Actually, we had a parallel chain with the bass. I ended up taking it out because it was just adding too much mud. I don't know if we're going to get the full effect of what it was before and after, but basically we had this sidechain going. That's good. But this amp added a lot of tone to it. Before it was just, I think you said it was just a pure sine wave. So what I was trying to do with the parallel stuff before was add some tone to it, you know, without being muddy. And when I used that loudness matching plugin, I was able to get a tone out of here without just being excited by the gain. I don't know if we'll be able to get the same impact if I bypass these. Let me see. I didn't work on that sound yet, so that's going to be jumping out. Let's just solo it for a second. So you notice it added a little bit of harmonics, which is good, but then it was losing some of the low end because I had to then reduce the output volume of it to make sure I wasn't just changing it and excited and louder. So I have this plugin here called Low Air. It's just another harmonics generator, except it does it in reverse. It adds lower harmonics, which I don't know how that works or if that's even what it's doing, but I liked the depth or the low end that this was adding. But then I needed to cut a little bit of it. So I did a little shelf, again, all using that plugin. And then the kick wasn't cutting through as much, so I did the same thing we did originally at 80 Hertz, but I have the kick dropping it at about 43. So I'll just add those in. You can see what it's doing. That's crazy, right? So you can kind of see what I did. So it added the character, and then I got some of the low end back by adding this crazy plugin, and then had to chill with some of the bass, and then let the kick come through. Now, it's not the perfect, it's not your, perfect kick and bass setup. That's where in the sound selection process, you probably can grab different kicks and basses to give it that richness instead of having to do too much in the mixing. So that's what I did for that. I probably won't do too much more as far as the kick and the bass. I'm not going to go 100% in on this mix because I can take 20, 25 hours on some mixes. And a lot of times I'm doing creative stuff because they're my own stuff. But on other people's mixes, I probably won't do too much. I would probably took a little too much liberty with like certain movement and delays on this one, but that's because I know Desir, and he wouldn't mind if I'm just doing it as a tutorial. I probably won't go too much further creatively with that. But anyway, so let's go on to some of the mix bus stuff. Now, you're probably, as I add gain, you're probably going to have to turn your headphones down, which means I'll have to turn my headphones up, or my voiceover up, so it's going to be a weird transition. What I'll do is, I had to actually, this is what the track is going into, this MB for Master Bus, but I ran out of slots for inserts, so I ended up going out to some random channel 1718, having it come back in, so I can have more channels. There's some cool stuff going on here though. So the first three are from a company called Air Windows. A lot of this stuff you can get for free. I support him through Patreon. He's got a Patreon account where you can give him like $1 a month for a bunch of free plugins. I mean, it's crazy. So if I would suggest taking a look at it. It's called Air Windows. You'll find it. You'll find it there. Now, again, I set all these using that level matching plugin, so I'm not going to do that again because it takes too long to set up. But I will do a quick explanation of these. So these are these first three. Now, they kind of look weird. They've got two components of them because I have to wrap them in this Blue Cat patchwork, which wraps AU and VST stuff for Pro Tools. So it'll probably look different if you pull it up in a different DAW. But so this is for this. Air is here, I believe. Yeah, and this is this. The first one is Air, and it adds that top end kind of stuff we were talking about. The second one after that is, I believe, Righteous. And what this is, it's intended to actually be something that goes on at the end of your mix. What it is, the guy created it because YouTube now, or actually a lot of these streaming services, they turn your music down. You can mix it to -8 dB RMS, but YouTube is going to pull it down to be -13 dB RMS. And so what this was intended to do is you set the loudness target, and it kind of lets you know when you're losing dynamics for that specific RMS level. I don't use it like that. It doesn't just do that though. Also in doing that and allowing you to get the maximum loudness for a specific RMS setting, this thing adds some weird harmonic stuff to it. It's just a harmonic thing. I don't know what he's doing. This button in the middle controls how the dynamics bloom. He calls it asymmetrical bloom, whatever. I just set it on and usually put it to the maximum output, which means it's probably going to add the most amount of harmonics that it can. I just do it until it sounds good. So you'll hear what I mean, what it does. All right, so I'm just going to do them in order. First, I'll bypass the air, or I'll unbypass the air, and then the one we just talked about, and then the other one I'll explain after. So you can immediately hear the air that one added. And you can also tell with this one that added a little bit more mid-range. I'm telling you, I tried to use an EQ to do that. This thing just does it in a better way. I don't know. And if you look at the spectrum analyzer, let me see here. If you look at the spectrum analyzer here, you'll see that there's still a deficit. It's even, which is good. That's a good start. There's like a deficit as far as the top level of the low end and this. You want this balanced. So we still need to add like 10 dB of mid-range gain all the way up. So this just adds a little bit more of that. With it off. That's with it on. You probably can't even really see too much of it on this, but you can't always do everything by the frequency. This is just a start to where you should be going. So yeah, I'm just slowly working it up. I mean, in the beginning, I had this thing cranked or I did whatever, but as you put other plugins on, you end up backing off on other ones. So this one to vinyl. This one you're gonna freak out when you hear what this one does. I don't know how to explain a lot of this. The components or the controls are here. What it's supposed to do is mimic how you would prepare a song for vinyl. So it's got a high pass filter on the low end or on the mid channel, a high pass filter on the side channel, and then it's got a high frequency limiter so it's not too crispy, I guess, or crunchy, you know. And then there's Grooveware. I don't know. As you increase it, it makes the highs come out and the mid-range come out. So you'll hear what I mean when I unbypass it. And again, I just set these to ear. I don't know, you know, no rhyme or reason for these, just by what I heard. Now, you might even say, yeah, I know it's crazy. You might even say, oh, now it's a little too mid-rangey. I think I addressed that later in the mix bus. But that's crazy what that thing does. And actually, if we look at the spectrum analyzer, I'll bet you it's probably getting closer. with that plugin on. So let's see. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, so yeah, it does brighten it up. I think I addressed that in some later things. But even if you looked at the spectrum analyzer, it's creeping up closer. We're getting close, but I think the main problem is why it kind of sounds like it's maybe too upper mid-rangey is there's a hole in 300. And it's not just 300, it's probably in that general area. And when I noticed that, what I did was I put 300 on the master bus, and I turned it up to see which instrument sounded like it came alive. And what it was this this one right here. And we can show that. So at first, all we did was we compressed it with this compressor. But I added this thing right here, and what it was a big old chunk of 270 doing 9.8 dBs, and then I turned the output gain down. See, that's where that one plugin helped me. If I'd kept this at 0, I'd be like, oh, that's way too much 300. I may not think to turn the output gain down. But that allowed me to get the right EQ settings, and then when I bypassed the matching plugin, then I was able to just turn down the output to whatever it sat in the track. So let's see what it did without it. So yeah, it's not really showing up. And then when I turned on a 300 hertz peak in the EQ, I noticed that this thing came alive. And then so let's see what it sounds like when it comes back in. So that's a lot better, but then it sounded like it was kind of covering up some of the things in the middle of the mix. So I used this mid-side mode of this plugin to take out certain things of the middle and then increase certain things on the side because we lost some gain when we turned down some stuff in the middle. So that fits a lot better after that. So again, man, level matching is very important. It's really a big step up. It can be daunting if you know, for those of you who maybe aren't at that level yet, but eventually you will learn. So let's get into some of these other things. Now, I'm doing some crazy stuff here. You guys are about to learn a really good trick. Okay, so I became fascinated with mid-side stuff. And there's plenty of plugins. There's plenty of plugins where you can, it's specifically made for mid-side EQ or turn up the mid or turn up the side of the entire track level-wise, not EQ. But if you do a little bit of research, you'll find out that there's other plugins, and Waves is the one I use, has this thing called Matrix. And what this is really for, if I remember correctly, it's actually for if you've mic'd something in mid-side configuration. There's certain ways you can place a mic to where one mic picks up the side information, one mic picks up the mid. I don't really know how too much. And this plugin, this Matrix allows you to then what it tells Pro Tools is that the left channel is your side information and the right channel is your mid, and then you put this MS button on the S1 imager, and it flips it back to and it puts it in mid side. I don't really know how to explain it. All I know is that the way I use it, when you turn this on, any plugin you put after it, the left channel is going to be your mid and the right channel is going to be your side. So what that means for you is you now have any one of your plugins that can go into multi-mono mode, which means you can affect the left and right channels independently. You can now have a mid-side plugin. So the first thing I did was multi-band compression on the mid and the side, which is pretty advanced stuff. But as you can see, it's multi-mono. You can choose between the left and right channel and affect them differently. So right now, the right channel is the side. So I've done different processing on the side as I have in the left. Now, if I turn, you'll see what happens when I turn the mix on. It's going to sound weird. I'm going to turn on this Matrix plugin without having it encoded back to normal mode. So here's the mix. So you can hear what it's doing is it's moving all the mid information in the left channel and all the side information in the right. So now I can affect the mid and side differently, which can help you get a different and interesting mix. So what I'm going to do is I'll just bypass the let me turn on this. So I've got this, putting it back to stereo at the end of all this stuff in the middle here is mid-side. I love mid-side stuff. I like technical. I like advanced, intricate things. So I did a lot of mid-side stuff in here. So we'll just go through them and you'll see what the difference is with each plugin. Now, I know that added a lot of stuff to the right side, but I think I addressed that in these later plugins. So again, I backtracked a lot of this stuff too. So I probably didn't have it that aggressive to start. And then I went back and I raised it up because I had done some other things. So I hope it's not that strong. We'll see what happens. I'm just going to go through the different chains. The next one is 300. I wanted to add some more of that because it was missing. As you saw in the frequency analyzer, it kind of sounded like it was too mid-rangey. That doesn't necessarily mean turn the mid-range down. It might mean there's a hole in another section. So as we saw in the spectrum analyzer, there was a hole in the 300, 200 area. So that's what I'm doing here. But I'm doing it in mid-side mode. Because if you do it in stereo mode, you might get up to 4 and be like, well, I like what it's doing in the middle, but now those sounds that were panned on the left and right, those are too muddy now. So this allows you to be able to do both of those. You got to be careful. Use your ears, though, because sometimes you can add weird phasing things. You just got to use your ears. So there we go. That was adding in that hole after this got really exciting and changed it way too much high end. This added some stuff back in there that we needed. So now the next thing is just another compressor. What you should do, and again, this was all set using the loudness matching thing, which is great, which is what allowed me to achieve certain dynamics. If I make sure you're not doing too much of your work with your limiter. We already talked about that. You can have multiple compressors. That's fine, because a lot of times they're not all doing a lot of work. They can be 1, 2, 3 dBs, dBs, and you might expect to do 4, 5, 6 dB total of compression on your mix bus, depending on what you've done on the individual tracks, and it'll still sound okay. A lot of times, just because you're doing a lot of compression doesn't necessarily mean that you're really squashing it, because depending on your attack time, you could have an attack time of 100 milliseconds. So your transients are getting through, and you might be like, well, this doesn't sound compressed. Well, because you're compressing the sustain, not the transient. So this one, though, is a little bit fast, so I'm catching some of the peaks, but I'm only at 2 to 1 ratio, so that's barely anything. Let's see how much compression we're doing with this one. Okay, so I'm doing 4. Actually, you guys might not be able to hear me. Hold on, let me put my headphones on. I might have to turn them. Okay. Yeah, so I'll turn... Oh, that was a little much. Okay. Okay. That's alright. Alright, I think you can hear there. So I'm doing about 4 on the mid channel. Remember, left is mid. Side, I'm doing about 4. So this one's pretty heavy compression. But it's not necessarily bad. This is barely touching it. If you look, every time it moves down, it's compressed. So this was actually barely doing anything, as you can see. So yeah, so the bulk of the compression is happening right here. But I'd rather do 4 dBs here than 4 dBs on the limiter. Okay, so the limiter. I wonder if I should put that on now. Let me see. So that's just brought the level up, really. It's not doing a ton of compression, but I would rather do 4 dBs of compression on the compressor than do 4, 6 on the limiter, because the limiter will completely squash it. This will at least let your transients through. So the remaining 3 plugins, okay, I'm actually limiting in mid-side mode as well. Yeah. And the way I set this one, Desir, I know it got louder because I pulled it down 3 dB. What I did with this one was I put on that loudness matching, and I pulled down the threshold until it sounded like it was over compressing, and that's how I knew. And you can kind of do the same thing with this link button. You can pull it down at the same time, because as you pull the threshold down, if you don't pull the output down as well, you're just getting more volume. This is kind of the same concept, but I did it with the other one anyway. So let's see what the last 3 are. Okay, yeah, so again, I'm doing some limiting, and I would do your limiting after your compression. Because once you chop off a peak, there's nothing a compressor is going to really do to bring it back. Again, just set it by ear. I always turn the dither off until the very final output stage. You're going to find dither on a lot of limiters that are made, like brick wall limiters that are made for the master bus. If you're not going to have it as the last thing in your chain, and you're not going to use this particular dither, then turn it off, because it's just adding noise. You probably won't hear it, but it's just technically you just use the dither at the end, and I'll add that one in later. So there's dither on here too. Turn that off. And actually, when I was doing these changes, and I had all this gain added, I heard a hiss, so I immediately knew I forgot to turn the analog off on one of the things, and it was on the hat delay. So what'll happen is, once I get everything, all the limiters, everything unbypassed, I'll turn this on so you can see how loud it is now that it's going through all that compression, and you'll be like, holy crap. All right, so the next thing was yeah, the limiting. So let's see what the limiter's doing. now that I'm listening to it, I don't know that I like that. It sounded like it flattened it out a bunch. Like it lost some of its dynamics, but maybe there's something after that was helping that out. No, because these are just EQ things. Huh. Well, what we can do... Let's see if we can use this plugin I was talking about. I don't know if I'll be able to do it. Yeah, I can. I'll have to do it like this. So I'm curious to see if why that kind of sounded like it flattened out. I didn't like that. Seems to have lost a little bit of life, but again, I can't really tell because it's getting louder. I mean, I guess I could turn down the output gain, but I want to try to use this plugin I've been telling you guys about and see if I can tell the difference. So the thing with this though is because this is doing a weird mid-side thing, I have to put the first one before this. Otherwise it's going to throw off the readings, and then I got to put the other one after. Actually, no, I'm going to do it. Let me do it like this. There's something about, I think it might have to be on the same track, even though they're routed the same. I just want to make sure it's got the right thing. So let's see if this will work. The problem with this is, well, let's not talk about the problem because I don't know that it's going to be one. All right. So now we've got the sender. We're having it send the signal before all this mid-side stuff and then one after. But I'm just going to, I'm just wanting to hear the difference between the limiters, the mid-side limiters. So, okay. Let's make sure this is going to work. There's this button here for latency, and that can affect when you A/B. So we already know up until this point, it's pretty good, like, because we even just A/B'd, but you heard there was a weird jump. That's because of latency. So you hit this and it's supposed to calculate the latency, and so when you A/B, it doesn't jump at parts of the song. So let's see, make sure it can do that. So you can already hear the difference. Just reading your text. Okay, so you can already tell that before and after, we know we're making improvements because this is making sure that when we listen before, you're getting an exact volume before you added that chain of plugins. When you go after, you're getting the same exact output volume, just with all the tone changes, but it's actually louder. I think maybe by 2 decibels or something. So you can hear when we A/B that we made some improvements. So let's see. It may seem like the low end is lacking, and maybe it is, but at least it's sitting all right. We can always add some stuff after. A lot of that boom that I hear beforehand is going to be too much boom in a proper stereo that has low end. It's going to be way too much. So that's the thing about near field speakers. You know, it's hard to get it down, but I've actually already bounced this and brought it into my car, and I did notice it lacks a little bit of punch, but we can add that in depending on if I get another mix to do soon, which someone's supposed to be sending me an actual client. I will depend on whether I can actually do an analog part of this mix, and that's where I would add some of the punch with a couple of compressors that I've got for that kick specifically. But we set this up so we can hear the mid side limiters. Let's see if it's actually helping or hurting. So it's hard to tell. It does sound like it brings some of the low end up front, which is good, but it does sound like it squashes some stuff a little bit. And I'm wondering where that's happening at. So let's see if we can analyze where it's losing its dynamics, and then we can go from there. I might be limiting too much. I might be, the way this particular plugin works, you can set priorities to each band. So if I put a higher priority on this band, it's going to limit these 4 first before it limits this. So it kind of just allocates priority. Let's see if we can find out what's happening here. And the good thing about this is while it's on green, if I make a change here, it should keep the output gain constant. So I won't be fooled by, if it gets lower in volume, I won't be, oh my God, that doesn't sound as good. Or if I go louder, oh, that sounds great because it's louder. So hopefully it's going to do that. It's not perfect, but let's hopefully see if it'll help us. Okay, so you saw me fooling around with a few things. So the left is the mid. So I was messing with the mid channel. The first thing I noticed, I think I might have had the threshold pulled down a little too hard. So it was cutting into the peaks too early. Now, it was kind of a trade-off, though, because as I moved it up, it seems like it lost some of its sustained energy. But I I don't know. That's just the decisions you have to make at this time. I'm not gonna tweak it for 30 minutes. We're gonna err on the side of more dynamics on this particular one, and we won't limit it as high. And also, what I did was I was messing with the amount of each band. It almost sounded like the low end was a little bloated. So what I did was I lowered the priority on this band right here, which means it's gonna limit this first. So that increases peaks in all the other bands. It seemed to be a little more balanced, and then after I compressed the mid a little less, that means that the overall volume was a little less, so the sides were a little too loud. So what I did here was I just kind of crept up the threshold on this as well, so it's not adding as much gain on the sides to balance it out. So after I made those changes and I A/B'd, I was happy with what the mid-side limiter added to the whole mix. Now, we're listening through this. The problem is this balances the output and the input. Since I've turned the output down, when I bypass this, the volume is actually going to be lower coming out of this plugin because we've lowered the threshold. So that's going to change how the final limiter reacts too. So I'm going to need to then adjust the output to make sure that it's still pumping the same way. I can either adjust the output or adjust the input of the final limiter right here. I can either pull this down a little more to reach down to the level that it was at before. It's kind of hard to explain. Let me see if we can just hear it. So when I take this off, the volume should probably drop. Actually, it might increase. I don't know. Let's see. I think it says it's adding 2.7 dBs a gain after the fact to compensate. So we're just gonna have to see. I don't know. We're just gonna do it. We're just gonna experiment a little bit. And I'm gonna take this off so we have some track space. And I'm gonna show you we can do this one of two ways. We can just turn the output volume up on the limiter. Well, no, we can't because we're already at 0. So I either need to add a gain plugin after this to increase it to the output that was going into the original compressor, because I can't do it here and I can't do it here, or I can pull the threshold of the limiter down. I don't know if it's the same thing. It should technically be the same thing, the level that it reaches its threshold. I think it's fine to pull the threshold down so we don't have to add another plugin. So we're going to do that with this same plugin I just used. If I have enough space. Yeah, we'll just put these back down here. Doesn't really matter. Just gonna move this over. So now, this is the end of the mid-side chain. The final limiter is not in the mid-side, so we're just going to go, we're going to sandwich this, and we're going to do the same thing with the final limiter. Okay. So, and we'll do the latency and everything. Test. Okay. Yeah, volume on my voice is okay. All right, hold on. So we're gonna do a quick test before and after the limiter, just to see if the limiter is squashing it too much at the settings it's at now. I'm pretty sure it's fine because I already did this last night, and then we'll start to turn down the threshold to make up for the output gain that we had on the last one. Actually, as you heard, it sounded like it kind of lost some life after this limiter. Not sure what happened, but it could be this. I had to put this limiter on the output to my monitors, or the output of the interface, because as I turn my voiceover up, it's mixing with the final output of the mix, and it was clipping, so I had to put this. I don't think this is affecting it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be quiet. I'm actually going to mute this, and then we'll go before this limiter and after to see if this is what's causing it to sound more compressed, or if it's just the settings on the last limiter. Nope, it just is compressing it too much. I hope you could hear what I'm hearing. I guess I just need to turn the threshold. Now, the problem with this is depending on your mindset about loudness. I'll show you after we do this. I'm going to show you this plugin here, which is it's another way to analyze loudness as far as LUFS. It's a different it's kind of like RMS, but it takes into account a lot more things. And we'll talk about what commercial tracks are at and what this one's at and what the difference is and all that. But so I'm going to adjust this limiter. We still want the limiter there, even if it's only at 0 dB, just to make sure that it's not peaking, that it's not clipping. Even if you don't have a limiter on, and it sounds okay, you still got to be careful if you're seeing clipping, because when you put this into a digital format and it gets encoded to MP3 or it goes into someone else's stereo, the way that their converter converts the digital to the audio signal, it may not be the same as my converter, meaning it might not have the same specs, and it could actually be clipping when they replay it, whereas mine doesn't. So because of that, it's good to have a limiter, but it's also good to make sure you're sealing. I know a lot of people have said in the past, oh, you can do -0.1, you could do -0.3. Well, after listening to this mastering podcast, I saw what he said. He always goes to -1, and the reason is because -1 gives 1 decibel headroom is generally a good amount to make sure that it won't clip in various playback systems. And I'll show you that on the other meter after we adjust the limiter. These peaks right here, these are what matters regarding if it'll clip in someone else's system. They're called intersample peaks, and if you see it go over 0, basically what it's telling you is there's a chance that when someone else plays this in their other stereo, it could clip. Your actual peak is what it's doing in this system, which could look fine. It could be under 0 the whole time, but this is saying, look, you got to be careful. So when you lower it to -1, the output, that gives it a little bit of headroom to allow for that. So let me see. Let's try to adjust this. All right, so I like before you saw we were at 2.9. It just sounded a little dead. It sounded like there was just too much stuff up front. The track wasn't dancing enough. So when we went over to 1.8, I think that was a good medium, because when I put it up any further than that, it seemed to lose a little bit of the glue. And so I think we A/B'd before and after. We'll do it again really quick, and then I'll show you the other two plugins. We'll check out the loudness, and then I think we'll be done for this particular session. So we're going to A/B it, and then we'll take this off for a second, and then we'll show you these other two. So that's good. When we were A/Bing, I hope you noticed the dynamics didn't change at all. It actually brought the high end a little bit, more glue, and it sounded the same volume. But when we bypass this, it's actually going to be louder. We did actually add some gain here, which is good. So you're getting it up to a higher level, so it's not so far below a commercial standard, although it probably is right now, and we'll talk about that. But it's a good balance before and after. And so that's how we set that. Let's take this off. It's probably going to be a little louder, so you might want to turn your headphones down. Okay, the last two, there's another one by Air Windows. He's always got weird names for this stuff. This is Hermy Pass. Kind of sounds gross, but what that is, I guess there was some mastering engineer named Hermy or something that he's friends with. This guy, Chris, I think his name's Chris Johnson from Air Windows, the guy who makes these plugins. And this guy asked him for a specific high-pass filter for mastering. And I think he explained to him the reasons that he wanted it, and I don't know what they were. So it's basically, it's just another high-pass filter. And I moved this around. A lot of times when you're messing with high-pass stuff, I try not to use them, but if you find the right one that works, then great. This one, I have it only going right before the final limiter. You might say, well, why wouldn't you want to cut the bass out properly before you're going in all these other compressors? Because if you have too much low end before a compressor, it's going to control it. And you might say, well, I don't want the low end control. Well, I think I moved this around to a few different slots, and it sounded the best here. So we're not going to do that again. I'll just bypass it, unbypass so you can hear the difference, and then we'll move on. Although I did this one in mid-side as well, as you can see. These two plugins are still in mid-side mode. They're the last two before it goes back to stereo. So I think I did slightly different settings. I don't know if 0.79 means 79 hertz. A lot of times, Chris doesn't like to put numbers on or actual values on the plugin, so you're not tempted to do something based on a calculation. So you actually use your ears. It's pretty cool. So we'll just bypass in and out and see what it does. All right, I'm going to have to listen in headphones because that sounded like it cut out too much of the low end. See, since we changed the other limiter, it's going to change the sound going into the other thing. And now that I think about it, this may have corrected the thing I was hearing before with the first limiter, that it was in mid-side mode. You know how it sounded kind of like it was hitting flat. This might have actually helped with that, and that's why it was in there. And that's why it's making it sound like there's not enough low end after this. I actually want to do I'm going to do a quick test here. I'm going to okay. I'm going to import the old settings for the other limiter, and I'm going to bypass those. I'll keep on the original mid-side limiter, and then I'll bypass the new one, and I'll turn this on and see how it sounds. And then I will, actually, that might be a little too much. Let me see here. Because I did change the values on this one too. Okay. I've already got you here. Let's get crazy. So I'm going to import the So basically just imported a copy of the second half of this. And I'm just going to go mute and mute here because it's going to be too much work to try to do all the other crazy stuff. So we want to keep everything up to here. So we'll take off this. And to keep it equal, we'll bypass this as well. So now the only difference is the original master limiter settings before we just made the changes and the original mid-side along with this Herm pass thing. And hopefully we're not going to be... I might have to adjust the output because this one's probably going to sound louder, the one on the bottom. Maybe we'll do that. I think we'll have to do this one manually. So we'll actually pull up the... see where we're peaking at on the original. So here's the original. I'm looking for the, I wonder if you guys can hear me. Let's see. Yeah, okay, we're okay. So we're looking for the RMS value here. So we're roughly about negative 10.3, negative 10.4 with the old one. So we're going to now put in the new one and see where the output is there. We're at about negative. We'll let it go for a minute. So it's actually about a dB. Yeah, it's almost exactly a dB lower. So what we'll do is we'll turn down this one a dB. And we want to level match them. So this is the... All right, let's see. So this one's at negative 11.9. So a little bit more. You have to reset every time you do it because it's going to take into account all the audio that's played thus far into the average, and we don't want to do that. Okay, that's close enough. So now I'm going to turn it on and listen for myself because I've had it muted the whole time so I can talk while it was going on. Basically, we're going to just bypass these two and see which one we think sounds better. They should be level matched, so we shouldn't be influenced by loudness. What I'm trying to do is set up. I actually have a little fader, a fader port controller here. It's got one fader on it, and depending on which track I select, I can actually use buttons to turn it on, you know, mute, solo. I'm trying to do an easy way to A/B, so I don't like gaps in between when you're A/B-ing things. So I try to do it as quick as possible. So I think I've got it set up where I can just do this. And that should be good. Hopefully it's not too startling, and then we'll just do a quick A/B. To be honest, my first thought is that the original sounds better once it has the that high pass in there. I think that was what was throwing some things off. But let's just check again. No, it's not going to work that way because this has to go into this. I don't know. We're just going to have to hit the mute button. No, I take that back. I think the original still does sound flat. I don't know what I was hearing before. Maybe there was a feedback into the mic or something. I don't know. But I still feel like the mid-range and the highs come through better on the one that we were just tweaking. So for audio's sake and for mastering engineers everywhere, I'm going to discourage the more limited version. You know, mastering engineers can do that a lot better than I can. I've gotten some songs to commercial levels where it didn't sound completely bad, but it takes a lot more time for me because I don't know exactly how I got there. A lot of times I just got lucky. tweaking compressor settings and things like that. But so for now, it seems like we've got a decent, at least from where it was when we started. It's definitely, and we'll actually, before we do a final exit, we'll do a before and after everything, and you guys will be like, holy shit. And as you saw on the Spectrum, we're a lot more even now. After all that stuff, let's see where we're at. Actually, before I do that, let's do the last one. The last one I'm just doing super high, high cut, low pass filter from this. The linear phase can do it at a very steep angle. If you've ever looked at a stereo or spectrum analyzer and saw this crazy steep cut that's usually around 18.5 or 17, depending on the song, they're probably using something like this. Most equalizers don't have that steep of a cut, but linear ones can do a linear phase because of the way that they do it. So I'll bypass this in and out, and you can hear, and also look at what it does on the high pass. You can't hear anything really after 17, 18, 15, depending on how old you are, how bad your ears are. You can't really hear any of that stuff anyway. And when you roll it off, a lot of times it helps round off your top end so it doesn't sound so harsh, because even though you can't hear a lot of the stuff, it still affects a weird crunch, a weird harshness that a lot of times these things bring. So we'll hear the difference. Hopefully it's good. Time I had it unmuted. See, that's the problem with this fader port is if it's highlighted on a different track, I'm not gonna be talking when I hit the mute button. Yeah, look at that line. I like that. I don't know. I like the uniformity. That stuff that's creeping up is my voice because it's not running through that filter. But I'm gonna listen and bypass again, and we'll see if we like the what it's doing. I think I got two different frequency band or levels. This one's going to 16,193 on the side. This is going to 15,279 in the middle. I don't know. I just used my ear. No, nothing specific. To be honest, I kind of like it without the filter on the side channel. I like it with the middle, but not the side. I don't know why. You know, you can move your head an inch or two to the left or up or down, and it could change your perception of the high frequencies because of how short the waves are, and they could be comb filtering. I'm actually going to listen in headphones and make sure that that's a wise choice. Yeah, so I like it without touching the side information. Again, that just goes to show about mixing. Like, I was doing this last night. I mean, I might have been 30 minutes in, 45 minutes in. Maybe I hadn't taken a break. Maybe I made not as good of decisions because I'd been listening to the same passage for like 45 minutes, you know, for an hour or whatever. And so I might not have made this towards the end of the chain. I might not have made as good of decisions. So it's good to take breaks. So that's pretty good. Now, if I play it from the beginning, you're going to notice the kick sounds a little too prominent, and then it doesn't really make sense until it comes into the hook. But that's because I haven't done any automation or arrangement mixing, you know, from section to section. That's a whole other part. You can do it a lot of different ways. You can do it just with a volume fader on the master track, so the verse is a little less loud than the hook, or you can do it with automation on a compressor, with threshold. You can do all kinds of things. I'm not going to get into that today. We're going to explain quickly the metering, and then we'll call it a day. Well, actually, before we do the... No, we can do the metering real quick. So I want to show you what I was talking about with the inner sample peaking. So I'm going to keep this up. And I'm going to pull up the final master limiter that I have pulled down to -1, to stop it from peaking in other people's playback systems. I'm actually going to mute... No, I'm not going to mute it. Wait, maybe I will, because I want to explain it while it's going on. Hold on a second. There's a bird on my balcony that's annoying the shit out of me. All right. So let's do this like this. We'll pull this loudness meter after the master bus, reset it, and then we're going to mute it so I can explain it and you can just look at the meters. It's so weird that the trim plugin has to be... yeah, those birds are annoying, man. All right, so let's mute. Okay, so you guys can still hear me and we can see what's going on. Okay, all right. So as you can see, the peak is -1. Hold on a sec. Okay, I think those birds are just taunting me now. I've got a spray bottle of water every time they, whatever. I even got a fake owl out there. It doesn't do anything. They just hang out next to them. Like they're saying, fuck you. All right. So now let's pull up the limiter as well. Okay, so I have this at -1, the very final output. Nothing is happening after this, although I'll put dither after this. So that's what this is, -1. This, I think this is the left and right channel. This is saying, even though you have -1, even though it shouldn't be anywhere near 0, they're basically saying, based on the calculations, you're coming even close to clipping on the right channel and on the left. You know, if I raise this up, those are going to go in, those are going to go above. Like if I raise the output volume. See, now you're going over. It's basically saying there's a good chance that on other people's systems, you're going to go over 0 dBs by a third of a dB. Now, will that be audible? I don't know. It could, it couldn't. Some people might want, you know, for a lot of the mastering engineers and songs out there, people want their stuff as loud as possible. Most stuff I see that's commercially good is like -8 integrated. And this is basically an integration of your peaks, your averaging, and all these different scientific things. It's close to RMS, but let's just say that it's around -8. But you can't get to -8 if you're pulling down your output by a whole dB. Because if I put it up to 0, we're at about -10. So we're about 2 dBs under what a lot of commercial tracks are pulling. If I pull it down to the threshold down to do that, though, it's going to distort like hell. But see, now, and -9 is respectable for a decent mix and decent master, but not for like radio stuff. And they're working on stopping this loudness war thing by these different streaming services turning your music down. So even if you put it at -8, it's going to turn it down to their average anyway. So what really matters is this peak to loudness. This basically shows you how dynamic your track is. It's saying from the highest peak to the average of your song, you have about 10 dBs. That's really good. Some squash stuff you'll see 7, 6, 5, and that sounds like shit. There's no dynamic. So this is pretty dynamic. It's got a high crest factor. But see, we're at -9 now, which is the total track. If I turn this down 1 to make sure I don't peak on other systems, now we're more down to a -11. So it's not going to be nearly as loud as other commercial tracks. But you know, that's all up to you. For this specific purposes, we're just gonna keep it dynamic and just show you the basic concepts. And you know, there's ways to get it louder. It would take me a little longer to figure it out, but eventually I'll figure out how to do it. But maybe the loudness war thing will catch up, and we won't have to push it that hard. But to be honest, it's not all bad. I've heard some of these tracks that are commercially out there that are really high RMS, you know, -8, and they sound great. And it actually, I think a lot of times sounds better compressed because it's more in-your-face energy for certain music. It's not right for every, you know, all kinds of music. This kind of music, yeah, because it's like dance, you know, you want it in your face. So this I could see going to -8, -7 or something from a real pro mastering engineer. But all right, so last thing we'll do, we'll take this mute off. And what we're going to do is, excuse me. Hopefully, this ABLM plugin will work across 2 different tracks as long as they're linked. We're going to see what all the progress we made from start to finish. Let's move this back up here. Oh, shit. So 1 at the beginning, 1 at the end. I think it might need oh no, okay, calculated it. So let's hope this works. Crazy, right? Those should be about the same level, output level. Well, we can actually check it. But this is before, and this is after. Much more energetic. And that's the difference between a lot of people's mixes. They usually neglect the mids and the highs. So if we look at, and look at our balance. It's a lot better. It still could be better. Well, with my voice it's better, but You had some vocals in there to even it out, but it's a lot better than it was. Check it out. See that? And that's actually with the ABL. I think if I bypass this to its true volume, it should actually even out even more. So let's try that. It's going to get a little louder though, so watch out. Actually, let's do a quick test. I want to make sure that it's doing the loudness calculation right. So I'm going to see what RMS it's at. Although I could probably use the LUFS. It's supposed to be more accurate. We'll check out what the LUFS is before this and make sure it matches after. Just to make sure that it's giving us a true A-B comparison. Let's reset it though. Actually, and we need to put this on the mix track because this is taking into account my voice. So we actually already saw that our track was around -12. So this is taken off to this number right here. I think is supposed to be probably the difference in what the actual output of the song is and what it had to do to make it even for the before and after. So this is showing about -14.4. So let's see what it is before. Look at that. Almost perfect. So we know that this is a true comparison. And now one thing I want to do, last thing, I want to check the frequency, because even though we had, when we were monitoring through this, you know how it's turning the track down, it didn't look like the highs were, the whole track was as balanced as I thought it was. So let's see after we bypass it if it's as balanced. It's probably gonna get a little louder, so maybe turn your headphones down or something. So yeah, it is actually accurate. The track still is lacking a little bit of you know, the low mids and stuff, and I could do that I could fill that in somewhere. And not every track has to be exactly balanced, but I guarantee you, if we could find a way to find the right instruments to bring this track into a more flat frequency response, it would be even better. So, all right, I think that's all we'll do for today. A lot of cool stuff in here. Hopefully we'll see what my workload looks like if I have this other mix to do. If I do, I won't be able to come back and do the analog part of this. But we'll see. I just check it out, check the channel out, and see if I go live. Otherwise, it'll be in the video section if I end up doing it and you miss it. All right, that's it. Peace out.